Hi everybody, welcome back to our YouTube channel. It is the final week of March and as you can probably see, our propagation tunnel is fit to bursting. So much so that I've even had to build a new bench this week, which is currently housing all of our plug plants that are ready to go to their new homes next week. And I'll just pick one up here for you to see. So that is our cornflowers that are going out next week. Now, aside from sending out a load of plug plants next week, I am just about to commence the final sowing of our stocks this season, and that made me think that I will do this video all about spike flowers. So I should explain at this point, by spike flowers I don't mean that they're spiky and will hurt you when you touch them. What I mean by spike flower is when it comes to the flower arranging aspect, these stems are going to be the stems that create the flower spike in an arrangement. So I've chosen 5 flower stems that I really like, all slightly different from each other. And in this video, I'm going to run you through how I sow them and grow them and particular varieties that I have grown and really recommend. So since I've mentioned stocks, I think that's where I'll start, as they're also the earliest flower spike that I can get to come into bloom for me here, which is helped by the fact that I can get an earlier crop if I grow them in the polytunnel over winter. Now, stocks are a hardy to half hardy annual. They are a little bit tender to heavy frost, so I wouldn't be growing my stocks outside over winter, but they'll grow quite happily in the unheated polytunnel over winter. So here I get away with sowing my stock seed, that's quite difficult to say, bit of a tongue twister, at the end of September, beginning of October, and then stock germinate quite quickly and grow into quite good plants quite quickly. And then that means that I can plant those plants into the polytunnel in November, and that'll give me a really early crop of stocks. And I would expect, if they've been sown in that way and grown in the polytunnel, that here I would get my first harvest of flower stems at the end of March, beginning of April. Now that's from growing a variety called Kratz, which I really like because they're really reliable. And I have trialled other varieties as well, but they've had slightly shorter stems. So I would say that Kratz for me is a really good sturdy variety, which I know will develop really long stem length. That being said, this year I am just about to sow a new variety to me, which is a field column stocks that I got the seeds from Chiltern Seeds in the UK. And I'm going to try these seeds for growing the stocks out in the field so that I get a successional crop on the stocks and see how I get on with this variety, which is new to me. Now, the reason that I like growing stocks is not just because they flower early, it's because of the scent. The perfume that you get from the flowers is absolutely beautiful. A couple of things though to be aware of with stocks if you are going to grow them. When you sow the seed, you will get single flowers as well as double flowers. Now, there are meant to be ways that you can look at the seedlings and try and work out which ones are singles and which ones are doubles, but I just simply don't have the time in my life for looking through thousands of stock seedlings trying to work out which ones are single and which ones are double. So I just tend to grow them all. Another thing to be aware of with stocks is that they only produce one singular flower. You can't do a nip trick on them, which you can with snapdragons and many other flowers, which will produce a branching plant to them. Stocks generally grow one good strong flower stem, so you want to plant them quite closely together. I go somewhere between 5 and 10 centimeters, so that close, because they're only producing one linear stem, and therefore you're not wasting too much space around every single plant. So if you want to grow a flower spike stem for scent, then I would recommend you grow some stocks. Now, the second flower that I'm going to talk to you about is Digitalis, commonly known as foxgloves. Now, before I even start to talk to you about foxgloves, one thing I need to make you aware of is that foxgloves are highly poisonous. Every part of the plant is toxic, so please do not eat them. I would also recommend that if you are going to use foxgloves in floristry, you only use them in vases that are going to be displayed nowhere near any food source, and I wouldn't recommend using them in a bouquet that's going to be touching someone's hand either. That being said, if you want impact picked from a flower stem in a large vase, then foxgloves will definitely give you that. There's so many different varieties of foxgloves, digitalis. Some of the varieties are biennial. My favourite biennial variety is definitely Sutton's apricot, just purely because of the colour. It combines so nicely with whites, pinks and dusky blue, and it flowers at the same time as apple blossom, and I just love working with those two combinations together to create large vase arrangements. And remember that if you're going to sow the biennial varieties, you want to be sowing them a year in advance of when they're to flower. So foxgloves come into flower in this field in June. Therefore, I'll be sowing next year's flowering foxgloves this June. And there's quite a few perennial varieties of foxglove as well. One of my favourites is Digitalis ferruginea, or rusty foxglove, which is a lot easier to say, which has a soft brown and white flower to it. And my other favourite perennial variety is Digitalis loitia, which is a really nice soft lemony colour. The perennial varieties of foxglove tend to, in my opinion, be slightly more elegant in the way they look than the biennial varieties. They have a lot more of a slender stem. The flowers are held a lot closer and the flowers are a lot smaller as well. So if you need something slightly more subtle, then the perennial varieties are probably the better option. But if you want impact, then you want the big boisterous biennial varieties. Perennial varieties of foxgloves I either sow here in the autumn or in early spring. If you sow them in early spring, the likelihood is that you won't get a flower off them till the following summer. If you sow them in autumn, you might well get a couple of flower stems off them in their first summer, but it'll be the next year when they really chunk out and start producing a lot of flower stems for you. So you've got a few options with digitalis and foxgloves. It just really depends on the kind of look that you want to achieve with the foxgloves that you're growing. If you want an easy sowing, easy growing flower spike, that one of its key benefits is you can grow it in semi-shade, opposed to a lot of the other flower stem varieties that would prefer full sun, then I would recommend you give foxgloves a try. Another perennial flower spike, which has to come with a slight caveat to it again, but I absolutely love them, and that is lupins. I've never seen them be invasive in my growing situation, but I know that they can be, and I've seen other people write about how invasive they can be. So certainly look up your local growing area before you set about sowing these seeds. But for me here in the UK, in North Yorkshire, they've never been invasive, just been absolutely lovely. I've grown lots of different varieties of lupins before, and I like them all equally. With lupins, I would say the same as I said about the foxgloves, is that if you sow them in the autumn, you might get a few sporadic flower stems from them the following summer. If you sow them in the spring, then the likelihood is they won't flower that summer, or if they will, they'll be quite small flower stems, and it'll be the following summer when you'll see them really chunk out and go for it. And when they do go for it, they're absolutely lovely. They're really, really strong flower stems. So if you're in a really open, exposed, windy growing environment, then I would say lupins are the best flower spike option for you, because of the way they hold their foliage around the base, and they have really, really strong long stems. They can tend to stand up for themselves, certainly a lot better than some of the other flower spikes. They'll grow in pretty much any soil condition. They can suffer from lupin aphid in certain areas, so that's something to be aware of. But aside from that, they're a very much untroublesome flower. I would say that if you're picking the flower stems for vase life, you want to pick it when the base of the flower stem is just opening and the top of the flower stem is still quite compact. That'll give you the longest vase life out of them. And one of the things that I really love about lupins is when you cut them and arrange with them in a vase, they will bend and twist to the light, and they create really, really lovely shapes. I would say that if you grow the gallery varieties of lupin, then they can be slightly shorter than the other varieties like noble maidens and such like that. There are also annual varieties of lupin. I haven't ever tried those guys myself, but it might be something that I look forward to doing in the future. If you're looking for a robust flower spike that is perennial, then go for a lupin. And fourth on my list, another perennial variety of flower spike, and that is the classic cottage garden delphiniums. Now, in my previous growing site, I used to grow loads and loads and loads of delphiniums because the soil there was a lot sandier, and the delphiniums really enjoyed that environment. Here on this heavy clay, I must admit they don't grow so well, but it doesn't stop me absolutely loving them. Like the foxgloves, if you want something with a lot of impact, then delphiniums are probably the guys for you. I tend to grow the Magic Fountains varieties because even though I want impact, I want something that's fairly manageable as a cut flower stem. I find that the Magic Fountains varieties that I grow are producing cut flower stems that are of a useful size to me, so around about 70 centimetres stems, opposed to like the Guinevere's and Galahads and stuff that get over a metre, which I find less useful in terms of floristry. Now, we can't mention delphiniums without mentioning slugs. Slugs absolutely love delphiniums. So if you are going to plant delphiniums, then you may need to think about protecting them in some way from slugs. Here's the new fresh spring growth that the slugs like to go for. Once the plant has started to establish itself into summer, I find that slugs are less of an issue. Another thing that I would say with if you are going to grow delphiniums is they do benefit from netting and staking, as the flower stems can snap in the wind quite easily. So exactly the same sowing and growing tips as I've recommended with the lupins and the perennial Digitalis varieties. Either sow in the autumn or in the early spring and grow on, and don't expect masses of flowers in the first summer that they exist. Once you've got a clump of delphinium going, then you can take basal cuttings from it every spring and they strike really quite easily. You just have to do it in early spring before the new stems produce a hollow in them. So you need to get the stems just as they're emerging from the ground and take basal cuttings to produce more and more delphinium plants. So if you want a classic cottage style cut flower, then you want a delphinium. And our fifth and final flower spike today is Antirrhinums or snapdragons, and I'm going to be doing our final sowing of our snapdragons today. Now, Antirrhinums or snapdragons again are a hardy annual, so I've sown them in September and October. Those plants I overwintered and I've just planted them into the ground this last week. And Antirrhinums are also one of the first flower seeds that I sow at the end of February. So I sow at the end of February onto a tray on a heat mat, because Antirrhinums can take quite a long time to germinate and then go into a plant of a reasonable size. So I do my first sowings on a heat mat and then I prick them out and grow them on in this unheated tunnel. And then I sowed again in mid-March and those seeds are just starting to germinate now. So it'll be another 6 weeks before they go into the ground. So this system's called successional sowing, which will probably be something that I'll come on to in another video. And in terms of growing the snapdragons, after you've got them into a decent sized plant, they grow quite happily in the polytunnel and in the field. And if you remember when I talked about the stocks, I said that you only produce one flower stem per plant. Snapdragons, Antirrhinums are different to stocks, because what we want to be doing is when they develop 3 sets of leaves, then you want to nip the top to create a really bushy plant. The earlier you do it, the more likelihood is you are to get an even amount of good cut flower stems off each plant. Varieties that I really like growing of Antirrhinums are Potomac varieties. I find that they have the strongest, longest stems for me here when I grow them. I also like Madam Butterfly varieties if you want a double flower head. And the late sowing that I do is these guys, the Ruffle Giants varieties. They'll flower towards the end of summer. And I find that all of those varieties are pretty much resistant to rust in this field. So there we go. They're my recommendations for including some flower spike stems in your cutting garden this year. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.